Hi, I'm Diani Arnigo. I will discuss about the taxation during the Spanish period. Taxation during the Spanish period was compulsory. All Spanish colonies in America and the Philippines were required to pay taxes for two reasons. One is a recognition of Spain's sovereignty over the colonies, and two, to defray the expenses of pacification and governance thereafter. Several colonial laws on taxation were made by the Real y Supremo Consejo de las Indias for the Spanish monarch. These laws were embodied in the compilation of legislations related to the New World called the Reposición de Leyes de los Reinos de las Indias. It was a 4-volume collection of laws relating to the Indies, which was published in Madrid in 1861. Taxes during the Spanish period in the Philippines were the tribute, sanctorum, donativo, caja de comunidad, and servicio personal. First is the tributo. Tributo was a general tax paid by the Filipinos to Spain, which amounted by 8 reals. Those who required to pay the tributo is 18 to 50 years old male, the carpenters, bricklayers, blacksmiths, tailors, and shoemakers, town workers such as those in road construction, and those is public in nature. Second is sanctorum. Sanctorum was a tax in amount of 3 reals. This required for the cost of Christianization, including the construction of churches and the purchase of materials for religion celebrations. Third is donativo. Donativo was a taxed amount of half real for military campaign of the government against the Muslims. In later years, however, the amount collected from donativo was amount exclusively used for Spanish fort in Zamboanga. Fourth is caja de comunidad. Caja de comunidad was a tax collected in the amount of 1 real for the incurred expenses of the town in the construction of roads, repair of bridges, or the improvement of public buildings. Fifth is servicio personal. Servicio personal, also called polo y servicios, was a form of forced labor during the Spanish period in the Philippines. All able-bodied males 16 to 60 years old were required to work the construction of bridges, churches, and galleon ships. They were called polista. Earlier, the polistas were required to work in 40 days. However, the number of days was lowered to 15 days in 1884 as the result of tax reform issues through the royal decree. Some of polistas were bought to fight against the Muslims, and others were bought in Spanish expeditions. The only way the polistas can freed from forced labor was when he paid a falia, or fine. But only very few could afford to pay the fine. The gobernadorcillo, cabeza de barangay, and other members of the Principalia were exempt from forced labor and falia. Revolt against the tribute. Cagayan and Dingres Revolts, 1589. In 1589, the Cagayan and Dingres Revolt against the tribute occurred in Luzon and present-day provinces of Cagayan and Ilocos Norte. The revolt of the Ilocanos, Ibangas, and other Filipino was triggered by the alleged abuses of the tax collectors, including the collection of high taxes. 6 tax collectors who has arrived from Began were killed by the natives. Governor-General Santiago de Vera sent Spanish and Filipino colonial troops to pacify the rebels. The rebels were pardoned in the end. The Philippine tax system was also reformed because of the revolt. Agustin Somora's Revolt, 1649 to 1650. On June 1, 1649, Agustin Somoroy, who was a waray from Palapag in today's northern Samar, together with his followers rose arms against the Spaniard over the Polo y Servicio, or forced labor system being started in Samar. The revolt was triggered when the town mayor sent the Warais to the shipyards in Cavite for forced labor. Contrary to the directive, the government of Manila that all natives subject to the polo would not be sent to distant places from their hometown to do forced labor. The rebels were responsible for death murder of the parish priest of Palapag. The revolt spread to Cebu, Masbate, Camiguin, Bicol, Camarines, Albay, Zamboanga in Mindanao, and Surigao. The rebels succeed the establish of rebel government in the mountain of Samar. Francisco Maniago's Revolt, 1660 to 1661. In 1660, Francisco Maniago, a Kapampangan, led an uprising in Pampanga. The Kapampangans were against the tribute, forced labor, and rice exploitation. For 8 months, they were made to work under the unfair conditions and were not paid for the labor for the rice purchased from them. Because of this, they set their campsite on fire and fight ensued. This was the start of bloody revolt in Pangasinan. Andres Malong Revolt, 1660 to 1661. In the 1660s was called by Maniago Revolt against the abuses of Spaniard because they were experiencing the same abuses. Malong hoped to be the king in province of Pangasinan, as they assisted many Spaniards in governing different towns in said province, but abandoned it when the war broke out in Pampanga. He heeded the call of Maniago and led the people of Pangasinan to take up arms against the Spaniards. When he succeeded, he proclaimed himself King of Pangasinan. The tax reform of 1884. One of the good reforms in Spain introduced in 19th century was the tax reform of 1884. As provided by Royal Decree of March 6, 1884, this tax reform contained 2 important provisions. 1. Abolition of hatred tribute and its replacement of cedula tax. And number 2, reduction of the 40 days annual forced labor polo to 15 days. The cedulas personales. Cedulas were first issued based on the Royal Decree on March 6, 1884. All men and women residents of the island, Spaniards, foreigners, and natives who were over 18 years old were required to obtain a cedula. The only exception were the Chinese, who were paid another poll tax, the remotados de infieles, that were not subject to local administration, and the native and colonists of the archipelago of Jolo and of the island of Balabac and Palawan. All in all, there were 16 classes of cedulas. Originally, there were 9 classes tax. The rate of tax ranged from 1.50 pesos to 25 pesos, and the 10th gratis for priests, soldiers, and privileged classes. That's all. Thank you.